to tax people, you have to be willing to point a gun at their head. So these socialistic tenets, these planks, are indeed actually antisocial behaviors.
We are so far down in this socialist fascistic rabbit hole that people don't understand it. We're so programmed that people can't even imagine, oh my God, what if there wasn't a DOT for the roads? What if there wasn't a FAA for the airlines? We couldn't have airplanes. I mean, people are just so brainwashed by this, but this is not normal. This is not efficient, and this is not good. Hello, everybody. Ansel here, back with my co-host, Kent, the master of macro melange, and we are continuing our analysis of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. In part 1, we covered planks 1 through 5. In this part, we're going to go 6 through 10. So we should get it all done here. Probably a little bit less in-depth this time, but this is an important topic just to understand the world we live in, understand the situation in the environment, in the economy, and the politics of the country. So, that's about it. Kent, how are you doing? Where should we start?
I'm doing well because I'm not at my desk job at the moment, though I am at a desk. So in the last episode, I basically read off the entire 10 planks. In the show notes, what I can do is I can link those for anybody who wants to see them or hear them again. Well, not hear them in this case, who would like to see them. As Ansel said, we are going to begin at plank number 6, but actually we're only going to cover plank number 6 and plank number 10. Plank number 6 is the centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. And plank number 10 is free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, etc. And again, this is all from Karl Marx 1848 Communist Manifesto. If you just do a quick search online, you'll be able to find these planks. But again, the links will be posted for you as well. And so without further ado, Ansel, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or would you like me to get going on plank number 6?
Yeah, let's jump into it, man.
Okay, so again, plank number 6 is centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. And just in case the listeners were not here for episode 1, what we're trying to do here is basically point out that what you hear a lot today is you hear something along the lines of, capitalism is failing, and look at the wealth inequality, and so on and so forth. And what we're kind of trying to look at here is, well, are we really a capitalist country? And we're doing it kind of through a Marxist lens, I suppose, where we're actually taking Marx's planks that he believed needed to be implemented in order to have a properly functioning communist state. And we're seeing how many of these have a significant part or impact in the United States as it is currently constructed. Back to plank number 6. What we have here in reference to, I'm going to add a couple more things, but Marx wanted centralization of the means of communication and transports to be completely in the hands of the state. So one of the things that I looked up here, in the 1890s, radio communication was largely unregulated. I think it was completely unregulated. Then you had the Radio Act of 1912, formerly known as an Act to Regulate Radio Communication. And it's a United States federal law, which is the first legislation to require licenses for radio stations. And then from there, you had the Radio Act of 1927, which is signed into law on February 23rd, 1927. It replaced the Radio Act of 1912, increasing the federal government's regulatory powers over communication, with oversight vested in a newly created body, the Federal Radio Commission. It also was the first legislation to mandate that stations had to show they were, quote, in the public interest, convenience, or necessity in order to receive a license. There's some buzzwords for people out there. And lastly, on the point of radio here is we had the Communications Act of 1934. The act established a legal basis for regulating wired and wireless communications on a nationwide and worldwide basis. The Federal Communication Commission was founded because of the act. The FCC, as we know them today, it replaced the Federal Radio Commission. Because of the act, the U.S. government could regulate new media technologies such as television and mobile phones. Moreover, the act permitted the regulation of commercial communication corporations such as private radio and television companies. So from the very early onset, radio, which was basically the medium of communication in the early days, before TVs really kind of came into their own. I mean, it's almost like they took a page right out of the Communist Manifesto, as far as I can see, by, they have these subjective parameters for obtaining a license. The second I see that, it's basically like, whatever the interest is of the kind of controlling elites, that is going to determine who has, what would be the word, what do they say on 1984? It's like correct speech or whatever. Politically correct, I guess. Newspeak, there it is. Yeah, so right away you see that they kind of put the kibosh on freedom of communication with the radio. Ansel, do you have any thoughts on that? Sorry, it was kind of a long read.
No, that was good. I didn't know a lot of that stuff, but what I did know is that radio is one way, and I don't think it's like a coincidence that it became very popular with governments because they like to have one-way communication to their people, right? And so I think that it's interesting. We had the rise of radio and we had the rise of communism and fascism and stuff at the same time, because there's a lot of propaganda that they just want to pump out over the airwaves, and there's no way for the people to really do the same thing. It's a monopoly of the airwaves and a monopoly of the signal. So, yeah, that's all I have for that. I think it's 100% socialized, 100% communistic, the way it's run right now. I don't know how anybody could argue that.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing. I'm going to keep pushing the terms two-step socialism and corporate communism. I think this is a perfect example of corporate communism because some people may point out, oh, but look, there's all these radio stations. There are all these quote unquote privately held radio stations, and it's like, well, they only exist via government blessing, by receiving that license. So they have to ingratiate. I can't pronounce that word. Ingratiate, thank you, themselves to the federal government, to their overlords, in order to basically create content, and they basically have to get a stamp of approval in order to say anything on the airwaves. So as far as I'm concerned, again, it's not directly the state doing it, but it is what I like to call corporate communism. So that's all I have for that point. If you don't have anything else, we can move on to the next subtopic here.
Yeah, let's keep it moving.
All right. Under this same umbrella, under the centralization of communication and transport, there's an interesting article that came out. I think this was 2012. I don't think Business Insider was the original one to publish this, but I always just cite their article. And so the title of the article really says it all, but it's these 6 corporations control 90% of the media in America. Remember, this was 2012. There could have been a merger and acquisition since then that has since consolidated it even further. But the quick takeaways I want to use from this article are just that the big 6 companies that are being referenced here are GE, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. And if you look under each of these companies, there's it's kind of an umbrella. So they control a whole bunch of other media outlets. And I'll just give one example. GE, General Electric, they've got Comcast, NBC, Universal Pictures, and Focus Features. So it's kind of crazy because scrolling back up here, in 1983, there was apparently 50 companies So again, this is corporate communism on parade, as far as I can tell. Any thoughts, Ansel?
Um, Not really. I agree with everything you're saying here, and I think to me this is one of the easy ones, right? Like the broadcasting and the signals and everything is so centralized that again, I don't know how anyone could argue that this is complete communism. And that's interesting. It's only 6 companies, and it was how many did you say in 1980, 83?
50.
Yeah, so it's just getting worse and worse. And that, I mean, that might be misleading as well, because they could have been owned by the same entities, and now they're just more consolidated under the same name. But yeah, it's hopefully it gets better. I mean, YouTube's not on that list, and now YouTube is a huge player in media. The internet itself isn't on that list. Podcasts aren't on that list. iTunes isn't on that list, and so I think that we have the tools to make it better, but the official airwaves that's completely communistic.
Yeah, I think those 50 companies were indeed they were independent through mergers and acquisitions, which in prior episodes we've kind of discussed how the Fed's money printing essentially creates an environment that is ripe for consolidation. That is kind of what happened over the course of a generation, and thus you have the just 6 my goodness, I mean 1984 you had the state, and it's like we're much closer to that than we are to having 50 companies, the way I see it. So
Yeah.
um, it's also not hard to imagine the CEOs of each of those 6 conglomerates, or whatever you want to call them, getting in the same room and conspiring. That's not very hard when there's only 6 of you, or through phone calls, whatever. So it's troubling, to say the least. So let's see. As far as the communication side of Plank 6, that pretty much covers it. Uh, Now on to just a couple points about transportation, Federal Aviation
Okay.
Administration.
Wait, so this is still Plank 6. This is communication and transportation, right?
Yeah, I should have kind of done a point A and point B just to make it more clear. But
Okay.
point A was, or like subtopic A was basically the centralization of communication, and subtopic B is going to be the centralization of transport in the hands of the state.
Copy.
And so you've got all these administrations that have been kind of created in the same vein as the FCC. I'd say most people have at least heard of the Federal Aviation Administration. You've got the Federal Highway Administration. You've got the Federal Railroad Administration, Federal Transit Administration, Maritime Administration, and the list goes on. And these, you have to go through your proper licensing procedures to get approved, et cetera, et cetera. And all you have to do is look at the railroad industry. I mean, how do you know off the top of your head how many railroads do we have in the United States?
Well, I know there's
3 or 4.
There's 3 or 4 big ones. Yeah, like Amtrak is passenger. Then you have Union Pacific. You have BNSF. I think you have like
Union Pacific.
Yeah, I said Union Pacific. I think there's another one.
You got
I think there's another one that's big, like Santa Fe.
something Northern.
Well, Burlington Northern, I think, is part of UP now. I think there is Santa Fe one. I think it's a Southwest. But then nowadays, I think they're just recently, this is in the last decade, they've actually started a lot of smaller ones have popped up because they got so centralized that a lot of the smaller routes were not economical for these large people to service. And so I think just in the last decade, we might have seen 10 to 20 small companies that are only doing like Houston to Dallas, or only doing Phoenix to LA or something like that. So I think there are smaller ones now, but the big guys, yeah, there's only probably 3.
Yeah, I know Amtrak rents the rails from the big companies, of which there are few. That's about the extent I know there. But I know again that it's a very. When was the last time a new railroad a new railroad was
laid
created?
Yeah,
laid. Yeah, I don't think that's happened in many decades.
Not a major
But
one, but like I said, I think there have been some smaller tracks. I know there from Oklahoma City, because I lived there for 8 years, Oklahoma City to Dallas, there was a new one laid probably 20 years ago. But like I said, that's just a small, very small local one.
yeah, I know. Doing a little digging into this, if you look at like transitioning over to like the federal, was it the Aviation Commission, the Federal Aviation Commission, the FAA. So they've got complete control, like airports. I mean, they control. Like, you can't build airports in and of your own accord. What was it? There's only been, I can't even remember the last time a new airline was created. There's only like four major airlines in the United States. I mean, it's just a completely controlled, centralized from top to bottom. Again, the airports are all municipal. They're not private. They're public, as far as I'm aware. And again, there's just the four airlines. You've got to go with through the TSA. It's corporate communism, sure, but in that case, it's in my opinion pure communism. You can't even get on the planes unless you go through the standard procedures. So there's definitely complete control.
Yeah.
There's yeah.
Well, and it's not even just the facilities, it's also the workers. So if you want to be a pilot or a train conductor or whatever, you have to get licensing. You have to go through the certain 12-step plan that the government has for you to get signed off to get your license. So not only is the actual commodity of the railroad or the airport and the airplanes, not only are those all regulated, but so are the people that work there.
Right. And I just like to here. I got a quick thing. I'll read a little bit more about the Federal Aviation Administration. So it's a governmental body of the United States with powers to regulate all aspects of civil aviation in that nation, as well as over its surrounding international waters. Its powers include the construction and operation of airports, air traffic management, the certification of personnel and aircraft, and the protection of U.S. assets during the launch or reentry of commercial space vehicles. So complete. I mean, they've got complete top to bottom control of basically air movement, at least in any major sense. I suppose there's small municipal airports that are probably more free, where you can take little planes out and so forth. But I'm not as familiar with the regulations surrounding those. I don't know. Do you know much about the little municipal, uh, airports that people take their private planes out of?
Well, they'll be inspected. They'll have security procedures, I'm sure, that are compliant, and they have to follow the same rules as like air rules. So you have to file this flight plan with the FAA and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, they will follow probably at least 50 to 75% of the same rules. And they're more lax, of course, because if those are private planes, then you don't have to necessarily go through TSA and things like that. But minus TSA, it's pretty much the same thing.
Okay. Yeah, I'd also like to point out under this topic here, I know that the plank itself basically just states, centralization of in relation to communication and transport. It's kind of a good exercise to think about. Okay, well, within this kind of vein, what else is centralized? I mean, look at public utilities, things like water, electricity. We have SMUD here in Omaha. You had PG&E, and these are monopolistic. I mean, I guess there's Black Hills Energy a little bit to a degree here in Omaha, but it's basically monopolistic. These companies, again, corporate communism, get all the contracts. There's no incentive to improve processes because you're guaranteed by law, by the mandate of the state, to get all the business for electricity, for water, for sewage, even like roads and stuff. It's usually, I know in California we had Caltrans. There may be some other companies, but again, it's heavily regulated and controlled by the government.
And
I don't
their
know what you
government
guys have done.
and their government contracts. So
Right.
it might be a private company, but the government's paying them.
Right. I mean, even look at transportation. Like in the Bay Area, we had BART. Has tons of problems updating the tracks and so forth. It's a lot of it's outdated. There's no competition for it because again, it's got the sole privilege of in the Bay Area. It just goes to show, like even beyond we have the centralization of all sorts of very vital, important industries that I think would kind of fit under this umbrella as well. So,
Well, yeah, and I'll go back to the employees, because pretty much every single employee that works on things that you just talked about have to be licensed. They have to have some sort of thing, either a driver's license or anything, really. I mean, everything is centralized to the central government. They control everything. And so, and that would, man, this makes me think how much efficiency, if we could just like cut out half of that, half of the licensing and half of the government involvement, how much efficiency gains would we have? It would be so mind-boggling where we would be. We'd fucking be on Mars. We'd be like mining Jupiter moons and shit by now. It's just, it is a tragedy, and everything is completely centralized.
yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of malinvestment because these are rent-seeking companies. I mean, everybody complains about the DMV. That's kind of like I guess like a
Yeah.
cliche.
Yeah.
Just constant complaining about the DMV because you have this centralized entity that has total control over you getting a license to operate a motor vehicle and so forth. All these other things are really the same. The only difference is, the DMV is actually, it's not private entity, it is part of the government. But all these other companies are, the government's just outsourced the job to these different companies. So again, two-step socialism. Government says, hey, we can't do it ourselves, but we'll just award all of the contracts to this entity. And you find, amongst many of these entities, kind of the same sort of poor service. Look at the wildfires and all this stuff in California. I mean, PG&E can't go bankrupt. So, like you said, all those resources that could have been used to mine stuff on an asteroid, find more novel ways to deal with the resources we have, they're just essentially being dumped in a fire to prop up these companies that can't turn a profit. Moral of the story, yeah.
Another government agency that gets involved here is the EPA, because of the emissions. So your car or the train or the plane, they all have to be certified and registered and built to a certain standard and yada, yada, yada. So there is absolutely zero that is not touched in the transportation business by the government. So should we rack this up to 100% socialism or what?
Some people may want to be very technical and call it fascism, I guess. But again, fascism and socialism they're just siblings. So yeah, I'd say that this is all pretty much tied up.
All
On
right.
to the last
let's go on to
plank that we'll cover here.
Yeah, so we are going to just to refresh the listeners' minds. Could you read the other planks, and then let's go to number 10.
Do you want me to go through all of them one more time, or
no? Just 7, 8, 9, and then we'll talk about 10.
Yeah, so 7 was the extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Number 8 was the equal liability of all to work, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Plank number 9 was a combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, a gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the populace over the country. And finally, one of the last plank we'll cover, which is 10, that's free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, et cetera, et cetera. Just wanted to read a quick quote. We have like the Department of Education and these sorts of things, but by state law, education is compulsory over an age range starting between 5 and 8 and ending somewhere between ages 16 and 18, depending on the state. This requirement can be satisfied in public schools, state-certified private schools, or an approved homeschool program. So Ansel, we've got essentially forcing, it's coercion. You're forced to send your kids to these institutions, and I don't like the word free education because nothing's free. Teachers have to get paid. The buildings in which the schools exist and the materials therein have to be bought and paid for. Anything that has to do with the school costs. And as of right now, property taxes generally cover the school. So if you pay rent or you own a house, you are indeed subsidizing this quote unquote free education. So, Ansel, any thoughts on this topic?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on this topic. I have 4 kids, and 3 of them are in the school system, and it's a constant battle for us. There is a couple things I'll drop here for the listeners to maybe go and research more, but one of them is a gentleman's name, John Taylor Gatto, and that's spelled Gatto. He was a state teacher in New York State for several years, I think in the 70s and 80s. And then he kind of made it a crusade against public schools. And he's a PhD and, very, very intelligent guy. And he has a lot to say about this whole subject. So I would recommend going and watching some stuff on him or researching into what he said. And then I had something else, but fuck, what was it? Oh, you can become a private school. So if you're looking into homeschool your kids, which we are constantly looking into and trying to figure out the logistics of doing that with our specific situation, is you can register as a private school, and that's actually easier than getting an approved homeschool program in many states, from what I understand. So check out that, becoming your own certified private school, because that is easier than becoming an approved homeschool program.
When you say certified, do you mean, because like here in the little kind of paragraph I pulled just from, education in the United States on Wikipedia, it says certified private school, approved homeschool program. So when I see approved, that, kind of reminds me of license from the previous plank. Are there certain things that you have to teach them, or how does that all work?
No, you have to have a curriculum, and the curriculum itself does not have to be approved, like you have to study this or this or this. But you have to have some sort of curriculum. And then the thing is, when you have a homeschool program, I think it's like a different department. And so you might have child protective services, or you might have other types of departments that come in and look at your records. So you have to keep records if you're a homeschooler, you have to keep all the worksheets and keep all your grades and do all this stuff. So it's much more in depth. But when you become a private school, you're treated differently. You're not seen as a homeschooler at that point. At least maybe you go to a different department for private school versus homeschool. So if you can, for parents out there that might be listening to this, I've just started researching this, is try to become a private school instead of a homeschool. And it's just semantics for us, but for them, these bureaucrats that can't fucking tie their shoe and chew gum at the same time, that they see it completely different, right? And because they're programmed to hate homeschoolers, but a private school's okay. That's where the rich kids go, right? And so it's a completely different thing, and I would recommend trying to go the private school route.
Excellent. On the last plank here, I think we pretty much touched on everything that I had in mind. And just to conclude, unless you have any additional comments, Ansel, before we
No, I think that's
up.
a good idea to kind of maybe make some conclusionary statements, whatever.
Hopefully, through this kind of two-part series, we've been able to show. Again, I'm actually going to go and read through the specific planks that we covered both in the first episode and now the second episode. So again, we covered, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax, abolition of all rights of inheritance, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state, and the last plank here, free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's pretty clear that in every one of these specific points that we covered, which were the planks that I think were more, most applicable to the way in which things exist today. I don't know how to put a percentage to it, but to me, it's been completely centralized, and in any one of these, the government has an extremely heavy hand, basically an exclusive privilege to basically do what they want, in each of the categories that we covered. So it's some may say, oh, but there's still private companies and so forth. Yeah, but then again, there's only so few. There's basically state sanctioned oligarchies in any given industry that have gone through the process of incorporating and jumped through all the hoops necessary to appease the master. Really, the tentacles of the state are in all of the topics, the planks that we discussed in these episodes. At least from my point of view, Ansel, what closing comments do you have?
I thought this was a very interesting episode, or this is a very interesting topic that we decided to do here. I think this is super, super valuable because a lot of people have heard about Communist Manifesto. They might have understand some of the things about communism and why it doesn't work. But I think it's interesting. I've never heard anybody else go through these specific planks, and I think this is valuable. So I do think that all 10 of them apply. 7, 8, and 9 are a little bit kind of 19th century, maybe, if you will. But
right.
But other than that, I would say all the other ones specifically apply. And we had a discussion on the last episode between fascism and communism, or two-step communism, or whatever we want to call this. But I agree, it is statism. And so statism is all throughout this. We do not have a free market. I got in an argument the other day with some guy on Twitter, and he was trying to tell me that free markets will devolve into monopolies. And I said, do you know what the definition of a monopoly is? It is a grant by the government against competition, right? It protects, the government has to protect you against the competition to have an actual monopoly. And people don't understand this. We are so far down in this socialist, fascistic rabbit hole that people don't understand it. And a couple times, I think on the first episode, I don't know if I said it tonight, but we're so programmed that people can't even imagine, oh my God, what if there wasn't a DOT for the roads? What if there wasn't a FAA for the airlines? We couldn't have airplanes. I mean, people are just so brainwashed by this, but this is not normal. This is not efficient, and this is not good. We would be way, way better off if we just got rid of every single freaking government agency that's involved with all of these planks. Let's just do it. Let's just start repealing every single... Abolish, repeal all this legislation that has to do with all of this stuff, because this is a communistic thing. And I thought we were supposed to be like anti-communist, or a free market economy, or free economy. We're not. We are a socialist nation. Most nations in the world, I would say, are as socialist or more than we are today. And it's just mind-boggling, dude. I hope that Bitcoin can fix this.
Yeah, I mean, this is all very antisocial. I mean, if you look at any of these, I mean, to tax people, you have to be willing to point a gun at their head.
Yeah.
When it comes to forcing them to use the dollar, again, if you counterfeit or do any of these things, it's a gun to your head. So it's completely antisocial. Has nothing to do with the market economy. A market economy, it forces people to, buy and sell based on producing goods that other people want
and cooperate.
There's no coercion. Yeah. So these socialistic tenets, these planks, are indeed actually antisocial behaviors. And again, I agree wholeheartedly with you that even though it's here in the middle, the centralization of credit in the hands of the state, I think that's the most important one, because everything else unravels if this plank is not, controlled by the state. And again, I don't see a better alternative at the current time than Bitcoin. Obviously, we'll probably cover Bitcoin more in other episodes, but I don't have another solution, to be perfectly honest. So,
besides like massive, violent revolt, that's about the only other option. And even then, like, we have to have a system to replace it. And so Bitcoin is the only thing in a modern world, unless we were talking before the show, you're talking about 1871 and all these gold bugs that talk about this. Like, unless we want to go back to the 19th century, that we don't have another option. It's Bitcoin or slavery.